Hi, so energy, it's on everybody's mind because it's going up in price, and as a resource, loads of it is disappearing, or at least people are worried about it disappearing, and everybody has got their own suggestions, ranging from nuclear to renewables to coal to it's never going to rise anyway, stop worrying about it. But everybody's got an opinion on this. It seems that generally renewables are the issue, and if you thought renewables was focused really around things like wind, solar, biofuels, then think again. I want to show you 9 projects on renewables that are, well, interesting. Some are just plain wacky, some are far-fetched and futuristic, and some are just plain brilliant. The first one I want to mention is the heat generated by sweaty people. And I want to mention this really because Boris Johnson, of course, has just been ousted from Downing Street, but in 2008 he was Mayor for London. And while he was Mayor for London, he backed this proposal to capture waste heat from London Underground. Because London Underground carries something like 1.35 billion individual passengers, and of course all the trains generate heat, so there's a huge amount of heat being generated in the London Underground system. Now, Transport for London want to be carbon neutral by 2030, and so they've started on this plan, and they finished a series of tests in 2020 where they took 55 ventilation shafts and 20 pump stations that were recapturing the heat from all of those passengers crammed together in the tubes and all of the heat that the tube system actually generates. Now, the tube system itself uses something like 1.35 terawatt hours of energy, which is enough for 400,000 homes. This particular project generated enough heat to run 15,000 homes. So it is possible and has been studied to generate electricity from the heat of all of those sweaty passengers. Number 2 is solar wind, and you might think you know what that is, a wind turbine with a few solar panels on it. But no, solar wind is a stream of energetic particles that are ejected from the sun and zip past us. We're protected by the magnetosphere, and without that we'd just all burn to death. But if you put a satellite beyond that and point it at that solar wind, then you can collect those energetic particles. Now, this was proposed in 2010 by Washington State University, and they reckon that if they had a sail 8,400 kilometers wide, they would be able to collect a billion gigawatts of energy. That's more energy than we're going to need for generations. Now, the machine itself is basically a copper wire. You point a copper wire out there, and there's a big sail behind it. You feed a current down that copper wire and create a magnetic field. That collects the electrons, puts them into a spherical receiver. Part is fed back to maintain that magnetic field, and the rest of it is proposed to be beamed down to Earth by laser. When the electrons are spent, they can fall into the sail, and falling into that sail will continue to keep the satellite in orbit. Now, a machine of that kind, with a copper wire 300 meters long and a sail of 1 kilometer, is enough to power something like 15,000 homes. I don't quite know how to talk about this one because it's well, it's kind of horrific, really, in the Soylent Green kind of way, the Charlton Heston film, but it's actually been done. There is a council, Redditch in Worcestershire, who is using the heat from the crematorium to heat a swimming pool. And there is a proposal in County Durham to take a crematorium and to use the heat generated there to run a turbine and feed that back into the national grid. And of course, the argument would be that, well, you're using these ovens anyway, the people you're cremating are contributing nothing, it's just the heat from the gas. But I don't know if I'm actually convinced about that, because of course, people are made of combustible stuff that they burn. They're made of fat and proteins, and it's a question of to what extent is that gas being wasted, and to what extent are you actually using people as fuel. So it really struck me as dark, if I could say that, and edging on something that's unacceptable, but it is still being done, and it is being proposed to be expanded. So you could think of the power of dance as being the beginning of this, because it was Club Watt in Rotterdam put piezo transducers under their dance floor, and all the people dancing the night away were producing enough energy to supply the club. Presumably, if they'd taken up Transport for London's idea, then they could have got the sweat off them as well. But they produced enough energy. Now, unfortunately, Club Watt has since closed, but that idea of transducers in the floor has been taken up by Heathrow Airport, for one. They've got a corridor where you walk through it, and that passenger traffic provides power for the entire airport. And of course, they're already in sports stadiums where apparently 100,000 football fans jumping up and down is enough to cook an egg. So it is an idea that's being implemented and is generating electricity, and one could say that it began in the music scene. So all those who think that acid is dead are wrong. I actually love this one because it's so close to what we were doing when we were extracting chlorophyll. Researchers in Gothenburg, Sweden have extracted a protein from jellyfish that glows green in ultraviolet light. And of course what they're doing with that is putting it on a solar cell. Sound familiar? What they're doing is a bit more like a dye-sensitized solar cell, so that certainly makes a lot more sense to me. But the idea of using molecules from bioresources that will fluoresce for solar capture is actually not that much of a new idea. And of course a lot of people have said, well, what about algae? This hasn't escaped the Swedes either. They've been looking at jellyfish like Cassiopeia and at fluorescent algae that could possibly do this, and the research is ongoing at the moment to create jellyfish-based solar cells. Okay, so duck power made me smile because what it is basically is a London-based artist designed a massive duck and it's covered with solar panels. That in itself is not the exciting bit. The duck acts like a reverse battery. So when there's a lot of energy, people aren't using it, they can pump the water out of the duck and make the duck rise up. When the energy demand is higher, and of course it's night time, they let the water back in over a turbine, the duck sinks and the flow of the water powers the turbine. So by being floating, it's a battery. By being full of water, it's discharged. That strikes me as a hugely novel concept because you do hear about floating islands being turned into solar parks, but adding that with the concept of the duck rising and floating in the water, I think is one of those very simple solutions that smacks of genius. Using that nature-inspired design has led to wind turbine trees. They made their appearance on the streets of Paris. The tree itself contains small generators that are about 3 metre high. There's 36 of them to a tree, and the tree is supposed to generate round about 5.4 kilowatt hours by the wind rustling through its leaves. It's been quite successful, and they have opened an American branch of this. Again, that inspiration from watching nature and turning that VAWT into a tree-like structure as opposed to some massive HAWT that chops birds into mincemeat, I think was another one of those simple solutions that is both elegant and ingenious. Okay, so perhaps one of the most beautiful of these quirky ideas in renewables looks at the other side of the coin. Instead of looking at how to generate more so we can use more, they're looking at how to get what we need without generating. And there's some argument that this has been inspired by Vincent van Gogh, because in Holland what they're doing is they're creating bike paths from luminescent rocks. So the rocks lie on the ground looking like any other rock during the day, absorbing the sunlight, and at night, of course, they glow in the dark. Now, lit is one of the most glow-in-the-dark strong material you can get, and it's actually quite impressive. And these pathways create a sort of starry night kind of image, and they are truly awesome things. They're actually part of the Netherlands campaign for smart roads and reduction in energy, and they are awesome. Okay, so exploding lakes are not the most widespread of resources. There are in fact only about 3 known in the world, and what they are is a body of water that sits above a trapped source of methane and carbon dioxide. If the temperature of the water changes sufficiently, then that gas escapes, explodes to the surface, and is very bad news for anybody living nearby. But it's a great example of local problems, local answers, local solutions, because what the people of Lake Kivu in Rwanda are doing is capturing that gas. And they're capturing that gas and using it to generate electricity, which is pretty cool if you think about it, and a fine example of out-of-the-box thinking. Okay, so granted, some of those ideas are a little sketchy, but my favourite ones are those ones that use old technology in a new and innovative way, and those that look at resources that are local and how those can be used, because that, to me, is actually where the answer lies. Schemes that need hundreds of billions of dollars and 50 years in the future, I don't think are that tremendously useful at this point in time. The other side of those, where we can actually be doing something, we can actually be looking actively at the answers that we might come up with that are suitable to us given the resources and technology that we've got, deployed in a new way, requiring out-of-the-box thinking, are the things that I think are kind of important. But that's only my opinion, and I'm sure everybody has their own. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.